Hey, Martha, we're here again today, and we have decided that we're going to talk about pleasure with our friends. And there's so much here. I feel like it's such a simple word, but so loaded. And I don't know. They say there's a lot to love about pleasure, but it can also feel pretty complicated for people sometimes. So I hope everybody will stay with us. We've got a lot to unpack today. And should we get talking about it?
Absolutely. Let's talk about it because the big thing about pleasure is hardly anybody ever talks about it.
We hear a lot more about other things than we do pleasure. So stay tuned, everybody. Buckle up, and here we go. So I think we heard from Martha in one of our previous sessions that she was once a pleasure specialist. And so we thought it'd be fun to kick off this conversation with a little bit of myth busting. So some of the questions that we thought of include, what makes sex pleasurable in a physical sense and in an emotional sense? Do you have any thoughts about that as a former pleasure specialist? And really, still, we're both pleasure specialists, right?
Absolutely. Every sex therapist is a pleasure specialist. And one of my favorite parts of my job is sexual problem solving and trying to figure out sort of how things work and where things aren't working exactly how we want and all of that. So it's an exciting conversation. But what makes sex pleasurable is really a many faceted question. I'm interested to hear your thoughts about it too, but let me talk about the physiology for a second. We have sensory neurons. So when you receive touch through your skin, sensory neurons communicate that to your brain where you interpret it as good, bad, neutral, pleasurable, a little to the left, whatever it might be. And then you turn that into either a spoken communication or a body movement through more nerves. And so there is a very physiologic aspect to our ability to receive pleasure and our interpretation of what's happening as pleasure. So there's part of it that's like just a purely sensory experience. And then there's part of it that's interpretive as well, which is why you hear people say the brain is the biggest sex organ, for instance. That's because the interpretation of what's happening is an enormous part of what's going on. What are your thoughts about this, Skye?
Well, let me dig in here. So, what makes sex pleasurable? When I think about answering this question for the people that I come in contact with, and even for myself, I think I have to go with the idea that we're touching some places that have a lot of nerve endings that are typically not touched on a moment to moment basis. Like, sure, maybe I'll moisten my lips or scratch a place on my arm, but throughout the day, I'm not typically accessing all those places that have those nerve endings. And so there's something really nice and groovy about that. And I have to go with what you said as well, although it'll sound a little different coming from me, in that the way that a person thinks about closeness and intimacy, if that's their jam when it comes to sex and sexuality, that interpretive piece, that knowledge that someone has decided that they're interested in being close to you and that you're interested in being close to them in that way too. The way that we can think about that can be really special and pleasurable. So I think our answers kind of line up with each other. And we've got the Martha way of saying it, and we've also got the Skye way of saying it. So, yeah, anything you want to add to that? Because I've got some other things I want to throw at us.
I think when we're talking about relational sex, so when there's more than one person involved, not just self sex, there's something magical about having somebody regard you in this very intimate, very personal, very private, specific to this moment kind of way. There's something about the positive regard, but not just positive regard, also juicy vibe and all of that stuff. There's just something very magical that happens there that I think is an important part of pleasure as well.
Yeah. So we're thinking about that psychological piece again and the emotional piece. And you brought up solo pleasure and having an encounter with yourself. Thinking about that, I'm wondering, and I don't quite have the answer, so I'm kind of just following where my brain leads me. What is the psychological emotional pleasure associated with that? And maybe it's that I'm giving myself some care. Maybe it's that I'm tuned in to a sense of desire and arousal and I'm responding to it. Maybe it's that I have the freedom and flexibility to do this for my own body when I want to or when it feels important for me. So I'm glad you brought in that solo pleasure piece because I don't think I was really thinking about that initially.
I like how you're kind of unpacking that a little bit. I think another piece of it is there can be a vibe within yourself that is sexy. So maybe you're having a sexy fantasy. Maybe you're watching porn. Maybe you're reading erotica. Maybe you're doing something that boosts your arousal. And that can create a very sexy vibe without there being another human actually with you.
I've got another one. Maybe you're listening to some sexy music. Maybe you're dancing around your house. I don't know anybody who does that. Ha ha ha. Maybe you're dancing around your house and some really sexy song comes on, like, I don't know, Love on the Brain by, I think it's Rihanna. And all of a sudden you're moving your hips in such a way that you're feeling really super sexy. So you can see that I'm kind of smiling as I think about this. And I think it goes to the word that you said, boost, how you can boost your mood or move into that space when you are not partnered, which maybe we have a whole episode about this at some time because I can see I'm really getting into this a little bit.
That sounds like an awesome episode. I really like it because I think we often think of solo sex as being a last resort, or if we don't have a partner, then we have solo sex. But I think it is so much more than that. And I think having a really vivid, alive, engaging, juicy solo sexual relationship is really lovely for many people and underexplored for a whole lot of people.
Yeah. So, okay, you guys heard it here. We're coming up with an episode right before your eyes. And I just can't let this moment get away without saying I could see a lot of benefit for this sort of thing, even if you do have an available partner. So, yeah, more to talk about there. Okay. So, what do you think about this next question? Does pleasure equal orgasm? Or I can, you know what? Let me go first on this one. Let me
You
go first
go.
on that. Okay. So as I was thinking about this, I came up with this analogy that I must admit I really liked it. If I think of pleasure as a highway with a lot of lanes, I don't know, maybe in one of these really, I'm from Indiana, so we don't really have 5 or 6 lane highways, but I've certainly been to some places that do. So pleasure is this really like 6 lane highway. And orgasm is one of the lanes, but it is not the highway. So you've got this pleasure highway, and then you've got this lane that, I don't know, could be to the far right, could be to the far left, could be somewhere in the middle. But you've got this one lane that can certainly mean a great deal of pleasure, but it is not the whole thing. Because I really didn't want, as I thought about the people that I support who maybe don't have orgasms or don't have orgasms quite as easily, it felt incorrect and wrong to make an assertion that pleasure equals orgasm. What are your thoughts about that?
Totally agree. I'm in complete agreement. I think pleasure can lead to orgasm, and orgasm ought not to be thought of as an endpoint of pleasure either. Orgasm is just a thing along the way that you may or may not experience. And I think it's a unique kind of cumulative effect experience, at least in part a reflex response. And it also isn't the whole thing. And a lot of what I do when I support people's sort of sexual flexibility and access to pleasure is decenter orgasm as a goal and really decenter anything as a goal other than pleasure and maybe relational connection if there's another person involved. So I think we could use a lot more practice focusing on pleasure rather than focusing on any particular sex act as a thing that we have to do if it's going to be real sex. What if we just throw away all the rules and focus on what feels good to me? What would I like more of? What would I like less of? What would I like to try instead? And move our way kind of improvisationally through an interaction. And if an orgasm happens, it happens. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. If your focus is on pleasure, maybe it doesn't have to be the be all and end all. I hate to see something as nuanced as a pleasurable experience graded then by whether or not we did this particular activity and whether or not I reached orgasm, you reached orgasm, and how many times. I just think, why would we put a grade? Why would we put rules on this? Why would we stick it in a box so that then we can get it wrong? Instead, maybe we could just improvise, kind of like you're dancing through the house, Probably if you have given steps to that and you have to do it a particular way and then you get a grade at the end, like, doesn't that kind of
Oh, boo.
like, that's not sexy.
No, that sucks as a matter of fact. That sounds absolutely terrible. And what was coming to my mind is like when I have ice cream, and let me just let you know, ice cream and I, we have a love affair. I cannot imagine taking the attitude that like if this particular bite didn't have the right equivalent of pretzel and marshmallow and ice cream and salt at the same time, that I would have to pull out my grading metrics and make a decision about that. I mean, what would even be the point? So ice cream is what comes to my mind immediately. So I think you have a really great point. Well, I kind of wanted to think about what is pleasure. So we're using this word, and I actually went to the good old Dr. Google, Professor Google, best friend Google, and I plucked up a definition and added a little bit of my idea to it. But basically, it came down to pleasure is enjoyment, satisfaction, feeling pleased. What about that? Something about that, feeling pleased. I loved when I saw that in that definition, feeling pleased or happy, content. And then I added the absence of tension, stress, and negativity. So since we're both agreeing that, oh, we don't talk a lot about pleasure, maybe we can kind of start off with the basics and look at the definition of it, and then turn that lens toward our sex and sexuality. So, what do you like about that definition, or what do you not like about that definition? Should I say it again?
Yeah, say it again.
Okay. Pleasure is enjoyment, satisfaction, a state of being pleased or happy, content, the absence of tension, stress, negativity.
I like it. I'm running it through all the Martha filters, right? And how do I understand this? How do I think about it? How do I unpack it? And I'm thinking about how non-specific that definition is in terms of what sensory experience we're talking about. Is it a touch experience, a taste experience, a smell experience? What experience is it that's pleasing? What experience is it that's giving you enjoyment? And that is what I like about that definition, because I think we really box sexual pleasure in way too much, right? Like, what if we have reduced sensation? Does that mean that we can't experience sexual pleasure? I certainly hope not.
I hope not. May it never be.
Yeah. And if I don't like ice cream, does that mean that I can't experience taste pleasure? I think one of the things about sexual pleasure that comes to mind for me is an experience of sinking in, like sinking into a situation and environment and opening up to the sensory experience of it. And sexual pleasure is so much more than stimulating genital nerves. So what is the sensory experience that you're having? What are all the places on your body that you're having a sensory experience? It's not just a finger on a genital or what have you. What is your whole body experiencing? All of the neurons in your skin, and what about the surface that you're on? And what about the balancing of the weight of more than one person? And just all of that. And that's just sensory. And then we've got sounds, like how are we talking to each other? What are we hearing? Is it summer night, what are those sounds? Is it a winter afternoon? What are those sounds? And then there are scents. So we're smelling each other, we're smelling our environment. It's such a rich sensory situation that I love anything that opens that up in an expansive way instead of boxing it in like we tend to think of it.
I'm just, you took us on such like a journey with the way that you described that and opened it up. And when we get through a little bit more of some of these things that I'm kind of throwing at us, I want us to really unpack how therapists can support their clients in beginning to think about sexual pleasure, like kind of narrowing the focus and then widening the focus and maybe narrowing it a little bit more and then widening it a little bit more, kind of like a funnel, if you will. So this is just opening up the conversation beautifully. Speaking of opening up, and you mentioned when you were talking about orgasm, you briefly mentioned your definition of orgasm, which is like my total fave of all of the definitions. And so do you want to give that definition of orgasm?
My definition of orgasm is it's a reflex response to a sustained high level of arousal. That's not the only way to experience an orgasm, but it's the primary way that we mostly are talking about when we think of an orgasm. So you're experiencing some input, some sensory input, and your arousal builds, and then you have to sustain a high level of arousal until a reflex response happens. And it's not something that we can force or make happen. It's a thing that happens on its own time. So we can set up circumstances to make it likely, but we can't actually make it happen. We have to nurture it along, hold a space for it, create an environment where there exists that possibility, and then release control and allow something to happen that's not entirely under our control. What do you think about that? I'm curious.
Yeah, I love that. And when I took your course, I heard this definition. I learned this definition. I did my best to memorize this definition. I have this definition written in different places so that I can touch it and come into contact with it frequently. But one of the things that you shared was in the reflex response, you gave another example that we could relate to, and that was sneezing. And just such a light bulb went off in my brain because I could really relate. I can not make myself sneeze, but I can have some pepper nearby or be near that cat that unfortunately I'm allergic to because I actually love cats. So I can create the conditions, but I cannot force that reflex response. So that definition I just loved then. I love now. And I really wanted you to say that out loud for our friends who are listening, since we're answering the question, does pleasure equal orgasm and orgasm equal pleasure? And so I think we're both saying we want to be able to appreciate the experience of orgasm. And how did you say that? You said orgasm should not be the end of the pleasure sequence. And I really liked that as well. So can we go there a little bit more? And I'd love to share what that surfaces in my brain.
I would love that. Before we move off of this definition of orgasm, I just have to attribute it because I did not make that up. I learned that from Ellen Bernard and Myrtle Wilhite, and they owned a Women's Touch Sexuality Resource Center in Madison, Wisconsin, now owned by Ellen Bernard, who's a sexuality educator. So not my definition, Ellen's definition. She may have changed it by now. So if I got it wrong for Ellen, I'm sorry. But I've been carrying this definition around with me since 2010.
Well, I'm carrying it around with me. And thank you, Ellen. And did you say Myrtle?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Ellen and Myrtle, for introducing Martha to that definition because it has really helped me understand a lot. So, okay. So you mentioned that for those who have an or sexual encounters, that doesn't have to be the end of pleasure. And I don't know that a lot of people are talking about that either. So when I think about if your sexual encounter includes an orgasm and what you might want to come after that, I like the fact that you can decide what you want to come after that. You can decide what might bring you more pleasure. Maybe it is conversation. Maybe it is drifting off to sleep. Maybe it is stroking each other. Maybe it is stroking yourself. So there are a lot of options there, but I really want our listeners to hear that we don't have to think about orgasm as the sole owner and authority of pleasure. Why should orgasm own pleasure? I don't think it should. That's not fair. What about the other parts of the encounter? Don't they get a say too? They don't have to be second class in the pleasure spectrum. So,
Let me ask you a question. What do you think are some common myths and misconceptions about pleasure?
okay, common myths and misconceptions. I think the one that we just talked about is a big one, that orgasm is supposed to be the one and only pinnacle to pleasure. And if you don't have it, then it wasn't really a pleasurable experience. Another thing that I see often is this idea of what should feel good. So maybe people are hearing from their friends or peers who they're close enough to discuss sex and sexuality with that, oh, this is just the best. And when maybe that person does that, whatever the best thing is, they don't experience it as the best. The idea, I think, can show up in people's minds that, well, what's wrong with me? Everybody says that this is the best part of sex. Everybody says that this is really enjoyable. And people not understanding just how different the sensory input for all of us. And as you mentioned earlier, the psychological interpretation might mean that what your friend mentioned was the best and you just had to try it may not be the best for you. And that's okay. Doesn't mean that there's a problem there. So really destigmatizing the idea that the sexual encounter doesn't have to look the same for everyone. And the apex for person A doesn't have to be the apex for person B.
Wow, I really hope people are letting that in because it's so easy to judge ourselves about our sex lives. And there are a number of kind of particular sexual experiences or acts that I often hear referenced in this way. Like I read about female ejaculation and G-spot orgasms, and it's a pinnacle experience. And until I experience that, I won't have really felt like I've explored my sexuality. Well, some people like stimulation to that area, and some people really do not like stimulation to that area. And so I just wish that these things were sort of presented more like, I wonder what's going to be true for you. Because
Yeah.
everybody is different. Instead of the idea that you've got to experience this, it's the best. Like it might or it might not be. And there's a way in which sex even can be sort of offered up like that. You've got to experience sex. It's the best. Well, it's unique and it's not the only and may not be of interest to you and it may not be the best for you. Same for orgasm, same for penis and vagina penetration, same for any particular kind of touch or any particular all the many branded orgasms kind of can set me off onto a little soapbox. So I won't go there right now, but just how many boxes do we need to have to check off to find out whether we did sex right? I think we really just need to come back to pleasure and connection and step our way into reading ourselves. Am I enjoying this? Would I like more? Let's continue. Let's pivot. Communication with the person or persons you're with. How shall we navigate this space together rather than why am I doing this so badly? And what's wrong with my physiology that I don't like that thing that other people seem to feel is such a pinnacle of an experience? We all have a different pinnacle, is what I'm saying here.
And also, I'm glad you brought in that little piece about, am I doing this right? Because that makes me think about the person who, if you're in a partnered encounter, that was told, oh, my friend said we should do this, and the partner agrees, sure, let's explore that. And then the response is, wah, wah, wah. And so not only thinking about the person receiving this particular way of being together sexually, but the person giving it, and they're waiting wide-eyed, bushy-tailed, like, oh, this thing is supposed to make you go wild, and nothing happens. So from the aspect, when we're looking at a partnered encounter, the giver and the receiver both potentially being harmed by this concept that pleasure should be the same for everyone. And there's these pinnacle experiences, these apex experiences that are just going to light up your whole world, when that may not be true for your physiology and it may not be true for your psychology. So I'm glad we didn't miss that.
I love that. Can I ask you another question?
Yep, go for it.
What do you think are some common blocks to pleasure?
Ooh, the first one that just jumps off my mental page is shame.
Mm.
I generally just think of shame as such a thief in so many domains of our lives. And shame, even though I think of it as a thief, I think of it as a kind of like a cat burglar, like really quiet sometimes. So it's having big impact. It's taking a lot, but sometimes we don't notice it for what it is because it can come in very subversively.
Mm.
So people's internal shame around sometimes their bodies, sometimes things that have happened to them that have been unwanted. We're talking about trauma and maybe overall sense of self. Other things that I think about are relational ruptures that have not yet been repaired. So something might technically have felt good 1,000 times, and on that 1,001 time, where there's this unrepaired, unaddressed rupture, maybe it doesn't feel so good. I also think about lack of presence, lack of ability to become mindful, lack of ability to attune to the moment, and how that can be a major block. Again, maybe something that you've really enjoyed previously is on the menu, but you can't access it. Future tripping, where we're in the future, past surfing, where we're in the past, and spectatoring, where we've become a spectator of what's happening instead of a person who's really present and engaged. So those are some of the major blocks that come to my mind when I think about pleasure.
That's such a good list. So, if you're a helping professional talking to people about their sex lives, that was a great list of the kinds of things that are likely to come up as people
Mhm.
say, I'm having difficulty accessing pleasure, or I'm having difficulty staying connected with my partner in this interaction, or I'm having difficulty reaching orgasm. Those are all blocks to all of that. Absolutely.
And I really can feel myself just dropping into such a tender place as I think about people who are certainly deserving of pleasure and unable to be with it when it shows up because of these blocks. And
Mhm.
again, talking to our therapist friends out there who are interested in being able to have some of these conversations with their clients, I just want to point out that the things that I mentioned that are blockers are probably things that you're already working with in your practice. So there's probably some familiarity and skill there. You might just be asking a different question to get to some of these things, but just a little nod of encouragement that, hey, see, this is accessible. You can use the tools that are already in your toolbox to deal with issues of shame and relational concerns and some of the other things that I mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I add a couple more to the list of blocks?
I want you to.
I'm thinking about physiology again. I'm thinking about what about illness, physical illness, long term chronic illness, pain, body pain so eclipses every other experience, as does illness. And, I just am recovering now from a 3-week flu. It was a miserable experience. And I'll tell you what was not on my mind during that whole entire time.
Yeah.
Nothing about pleasure accessible to me really whatsoever. So I think we have to really, I want to just send some love to people who are living with chronic illness or chronic pain, because it poses a unique set of challenges that I think are important to discuss in a very direct way and to acknowledge. I also think that self-judgment, which we've sort of been touching on again and again in this conversation, is a really big block. I'm not doing it right. I'm not good at this. I can't tell if my partner likes it or not. I'm probably bad at it. My partner's physiologic arousal response, like erection or puffiness or wetness, isn't going like I expected. And so I'm probably a terrible lover. And that kind of self-judgment pretty quickly brings a negative spiral that is difficult to get out of. So I think those are the ones that come to mind as being really common in addition to the things that you mentioned.
And I just want to give you a shout out for bringing up, the sickness and the illness and even the chronic illnesses. So important to understand that that quite naturally is going to have an impact on access to pleasure. So, yeah. And I can just notice myself thinking about when I had breast cancer and went through the radiation process. That was over a period of a year between the two diagnoses that I had, back-to-back breast cancer diagnoses. And let me tell you, I was at odds with my body during that time. The other thing that shows up immediately is when I use the language, my body betrayed me and I miscarried what would have been my third child with my ex-husband. I didn't understand my body at that time. I found it to be very untrustworthy. And, we were at odds every day. I no longer trusted it to operate the way that it was supposed to. So that makes me, really think about what it is like for not only chronic illnesses, but something like a miscarriage, how that could indeed impact one's relationship with pleasure.
Oh, that's such a touching and beautiful story that you shared. Thank you. Thank you for your vulnerability. I think that's probably going to help a lot of people to hear.
I hope so. I'll admit and acknowledge it was a rough time. And I'll say with pride and joy, it was something that I was able to work through, both of those things. So there is hope. When you're in the middle of something, sometimes it can feel hopeless, but there is absolutely hope. So
Mhm. I like your inclusion of miscarriage, which, there are a number of just sort of regular life things that aren't an illness. They're not, many of them are not even a bad thing, just life stage things. Anytime hormones are shifting around childbirth, menopause, puberty, gender transition, anytime hormones are shifting, pleasure is going to shift, desire is going to shift, physiologic arousal is going to shift. When I think about pleasure, it's so multifactorial. I can hardly even talk about it. It's just everything affects it. Everything affects it. And yet we expect it to show up reliably, just like it always does every single day for us, so that we can get our orgasm when we expect it, so that we can know that we did sex right. And I just think that is
makes
I
no
think
sense when you put it like that.
it makes it's kind of delusional, but that sounds so judgy. It's so it's so
Yeah,
human,
very human. We can hold both.
but it's so heartbreaking because what we're doing is distancing ourselves from allowing pleasure and enjoyment where we can access it.
I want to jump in here because I see an opportunity for our friends listening who are wanting to put their foot in these waters as they discuss with their clients some of these changes and some of these life events, being able to say, is it okay if we talk about how this may or may not be affecting your sex and sexuality? So, as a therapist, you might very well have an understanding that, oh, my client experienced this particular thing related to how their body functions or hormones. But you could go one step further and ask about the sexual domain.
Yes, absolutely. I hear from people around illnesses in particular that often clinical staff, nursing staff, health educators that you may be interacting with around whatever your health experience is rarely talk about sex. And it just gets dropped. And yet, it's an area where if you have some support and it's part of the conversation throughout the process, you can experience a lot less losses and disappointment around it, but you'd have to be in a conversation. So I think there's a real opening for a therapist or a coach to just bring that forward. you're getting together with a new person, you're breaking up with somebody, you've got a big life thing going on, there's a hormone shift going on, there's whatever, an illness, a new diagnosis, your back is acting up. Like, how is this affecting your relationship and how is this affecting your sexual intimacy and pleasure? Such a smart question, and good for you for surfacing it, Skye. That was beautiful.
And since, our friends are listening to us and they can probably rewind, you don't have to invent the wheel. You can just ask that exactly the way Martha did. So I encourage you to rewind, write that down, and maybe give it a shot. See what that feels like for you to do in your office with your clients, the people that you work with. So, okay, let's see. What are some changes that the average person could make that would be likely to increase their pleasure experiences? So, what are some things that you can think of that might help the average person?
The very first thing that comes to mind is embodiment. If you're able to come into your body and drop into a space where you're in touch with your sensory experience, you're much more likely to experience pleasure. Speaking as a busy person who's in my head a whole bunch, that could be something you need to practice. It could be a muscle you need to build. It could be something that you build into a mindfulness practice that's particularly somatic and body-based. Just some way. I think earlier I used the word drop into a space and open. And that's a thing that takes so much practice for some people that if you only practice when you're with a sex partner, that might not be enough practice.
Yeah.
So even just to write in this moment for me to notice, like, I have a body with sensations, and there are sounds, and there are smells, and there are sights. Even with my eyes closed, I can see light and dark. And I'm also in relationship in this moment. I'm feeling Skye, and I'm feeling the relationship with people who might be listening. And I'm in relationship and I'm aware of that. So being able to drop into a moment of experiencing, to me, is the biggest change that you could make that would help you get in touch with pleasure. I'm curious what you think about that, Skye.
Okay, I can answer the question from a clinical perspective, but I think I just have to first say that I experience that as such an invitation. Like, as you moved into that embodiment moment and came present, I could feel myself hearing an invitation and responding to that invitation, and then holding the awareness that, oh, this is fairly infrequent. So I'm going to agree with you that in our busy world, this is not necessarily a practice that maybe we frequent as often as we would like. So you're going to get my 100% agreement, thumbs up, smiley face, gold star, sticker, all the above on that. So yay, we like affirmation. Or okay, I like affirmation. Maybe I'm projecting. And then I'll move to what I think the average person could do. And I think that's to engage with themselves around this conversation, to invite the noticing that I'm going to train myself to have a cognitive bias for moments of pleasure. So when I first step into that shower, since I've been talking about pleasure, I'm more likely to notice it. And maybe it becomes ubiquitous. I don't know about you, but I've had situations in my life where I'll maybe get a car, and all of the sudden I see this car everywhere. Maybe let's say I got a Toyota Corolla and wasn't thinking about Toyota Corollas before. But as soon as I began to open up to thinking about getting one, all of a sudden it was like, oh my gosh, my next door neighbor has a Toyota Corolla, and the person across the street, their kid has a Toyota Corolla. It becomes very ubiquitous. So we know that our brains have these biases, have cognitive biases. That's just kind of the way we are. We don't have to think negatively about it. We can engage with it, and kind of creating a cognitive bias around pleasure so that we are seeing it in all the little places where we might have missed it otherwise. And that can be a lot of fun talk about, I'm going to use your language. And if I remember correctly, it's another language that you may have attributed to someone else, but a happiness project. What a great happiness project to have in moments of intimacy and in outside of those moments of sexual intimacy.
Yeah, I can take ownership of the happiness project. Other people talk about happiness projects, but I use that term on my own. So I didn't get that from somebody else.
Do you think that falls in line with your idea of a happiness project? Or am I
Absolutely.
misquoting you?
No, no, no. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I don't want to say any more about what people could do to increase their experience of pleasure because I don't want to water down what we just surfaced. Embodiment, getting in touch with yourself and noticing moments of pleasure and beginning to look for them and acknowledge them so that you see more of them. The thing I love about this list is, as sex therapists, these were the first things we thought of. So we're sexuality professionals. We know a lot about how the body and pleasure and arousal work and how sex works and the things you can do and what's in the manual, what's in all of the books about how to experience more pleasure. And yet this is what we brought forward. That I think is just so meaningful. And I'm afraid that it would get watered down if we start talking about sexual health, physical well-being, technique, and like none of that even comes close. I mean, some of it does, I think, and like sexual health and function, it's not unimportant, but it's not more important either. And this category of stuff, presence, awareness, embodiment, so easily gets shuffled off to the side as being like soft science or not really that important or buzzwords, or it's sort of like self-care, like who cares, blah, blah, blah. We always hear that. Doesn't mean anything. And I don't want that to happen here because this means something. If you're having trouble accessing pleasure, we just gave you the key to the kingdom. And you totally can do it. And if you're a therapist or a coach, it's also within your skill set. Like this is not inaccessible to anybody. So I think it's the logical place to start because we can talk about sexual function and dysfunction and physiology of arousal till the cows come home, but we don't have to because it means nothing if you're not in your body and looking for and noticing pleasure.
Martha, I cannot even right now. That is so good and so true. And it's interesting because we both, like you said, we're both sexuality professionals and we both have looked at this and studied all of these things. But this is organically started. So it is telling. And I hope this is encouraging to our listeners who are thinking about having these types of conversations or maybe aren't thinking about it, but are kind of being thrust there because a client is kind of taking them there. I really hope that they can hear the wisdom of your words. Maybe we spend just a few minutes talking about how we talk about pleasure specifically with our clients. And I'll go ahead and jump in first. So when I talk about pleasure with clients, I do exactly what everyone heard both of us doing. I just start talking about pleasure from a general perspective. And I mentioned the funnel before. I start wide because I think people can get really fixated if they're not having the amount of pleasure, or throw in some other words, desire or arousal. I'll throw those in, but then we're going to put them to the side and stick with pleasure that they want. They may not even notice that, oh, wait a minute, I'm not having a lot of pleasure generally, or I'm not connected to a lot of pleasure generally. So these are the kind of questions I ask and really can get some very interesting answers to those questions. And people start to kind of have those aha moments and really can buy in, very easily once they see the connection of, oh, so this is a continuation of something. This isn't necessarily a problem specifically with my sex and sexuality. So that's one of the ways that I kind of expand the conversation beyond sex and sexuality. And then, we can bring it back down. What's one of your how-tos, Martha?
I often find myself working with clients or consulting for therapists who are working with clients who have difficulty accessing pleasure, maybe trauma history or a whole lot of blocks of one kind or another. And one of my favorite kind of entry points, it's not unlike what you just said, is to look for neutral and then work toward pleasant and not in a sexual context. So I often talk about standing at the sink doing dishes. So something that we do regularly. A shower is another good example. It's just a little closer to sex than doing dishes is. So if somebody's just like a little nervous about the whole intimate context, just come to the kitchen sink and
Very neutral.
very super neutral, and then notice the sensory experience. So is the water warm, cold? Does it need to be warmed up? Small adjustments. We just automatically are aware. I need to warm it up. I turn this knob. I need to cool it down. I turn that knob. I make adjustments because I'm having a sensory experience and a perception, and there's something I want, and I'm making it happen. That's the whole thing about sex. And so is the water too soapy? Is it not soapy enough? We just automatically add. And so to my way of thinking, if you need an entry point, this is one that's a pretty safe, non-triggery entry point for most people. And if you can just look for an awareness of this is neutral. It doesn't have to be, ooh, that water feels warm and nice, or that water's too cold and I don't like it. Just look for neutral. Adjust things until you've got neutral. And then see if you can just stretch toward pleasant. Like, this is okay. Okay, this is neutral. Okay, this maybe could be pleasant. That's an internal progression in the right direction toward pleasure. So I think some people just think if I don't experience pleasure or I can't get in touch with it, then I'm just broken and there's something wrong with me. But I think that we have emotional habits, and our emotional habits often got imposed on us against our will. And then it takes some deliberate kind of restructuring of how we perceive and how we interpret. So what I like about the sync thing in particular is that we're in touch enough with our sensory experience that we're automatically adjusting all the time. So even if I am a person who thinks I can't even hardly figure out how to be in my body during sex, let alone share anything with my partner about what I might want or not want, I would, as a therapist, take this all the way back to the kitchen sink and look at the exception there. Yet somehow here at the kitchen sink, you're able to experience this as neutral, and you're able to make many small adjustments effortlessly with zero stress. So look at you being a rock star. Now, how can we start moving that in the direction of more pleasure? And then how can we start bringing it forward into language so that we can bring another person into the conversation?
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So accessible. This is brilliant and simple and brilliant. I love this. Very accessible, very non-threatening. And what a way to give a client a win to notice that you're already doing this. So I love that. The other thing that I think about in terms of kind of a how to do it, and you surfaced this when you said thinking about blocks and what blocks are. I have worked with clients who, for some reason, had a mentality that unless they were working or killing themselves, that they were doing something wrong. So productivity was a high value, maybe in their family of origin or something like that. And so pleasure is a luxury. And I like Lionel Tiger, the book, The Pursuit of Pleasure. He looks at pleasure as an evolutionary entitlement. And
Oh,
so I know, isn't it decadent? So this idea that pleasure lets us know that we're doing things right as a species and as an individual, and we can utilize that we can and do utilize that awareness that, okay, maybe pleasure is having a cool drink of water when you're feeling dehydrated, and that coolness hits your tongue and it hits your throat. And yes, it's meeting a need, but there's also maybe some pleasure attached to when you first grab the glass and it feels cool to the touch, and your brain starts to tell you, oh, relief is coming. Right. So this is kind of what I think about in terms of an evolutionary entitlement that reinforces this thing that you're experiencing is pleasurable, is good for you, and it's letting you know that you're on the right track. So seeing if I can get people to say, oh, okay, that I can buy into that a little bit. And then seeing if maybe we can buy into it a little bit more. And okay, well, why can't we buy into that a little bit more? Because there are individuals who feel like they're doing something wrong if they are experiencing pleasure or too much pleasure. So that block concept, using that to introduce this idea from the book, The Pursuit of Pleasure. So,
Wow, I love that, Skye. And same words you used a minute ago, like that's simple, it's accessible, it's super smart, and it's a great entry point for people because I think everybody can really feel it and relate to it. We can find pleasure in our normal day-to-day operating, and we don't have to think of sexual pleasure as being a completely different category of things. I love that. It's amazing. And I'm wondering if this is actually a good place to wrap it up, because I have some notes to take about other episodes that we could completely go in several different directions here. And I don't want to drop those, but also if we did them all right now, this would be a very, very long episode. So again, like I don't want to dilute that, if we've inspired people to maybe go try just a 15-second embodiment practice, or go to the kitchen sink and have a sensory experience that's neutral. 10 seconds, give it 10 seconds of your life, or the next time you step into a shower, or the next time you reach for a glass of water. Just notice your sensory experience and then see what you can do with that takes you closer to pleasure. I think that is enough, because if we keep going, people will get focused on something else. And I think that the foundation is super important. What do you think?
I think let's listen to that good wisdom. Let's tell our friends we'll see them the next time. And thanks so much for listening, everybody.
Go get some pleasure. Hey friends, if you're listening to us talk about working with sex issues in therapy and wondering, gosh, how in the world would I actually do that? I have something for you. It's a 15-week online course called Assessing and Treating Sex Issues in Psychotherapy, but it's not just for therapists, it's also for coaches and other helping professionals. And it's designed to help you get all the way from just starting out to really comfortable and confident and competent working with sex issues. You can learn all about it at the link in the show notes, and I really hope I get to work with you.
And friends, if you want to spend time with me, you can find me at workwithdrskye.com. I have clients all over the US and even some abroad. So if you're hearing something and you're thinking, I think that Skye could support me in this particular issue, I'd be happy to hear from you. Again, that's workwithdrskye.com.